So why don't we start? Again, we want to try to, oh, Monica's here too. Okay. I'll start anyway. So we want to do this in an hour if we possibly can. There's a lot to talk about. So welcome everyone. It's really nice to see a lot of people here. It's really nice. This is the third in a series of monthly programs that are that's sponsored by the Green Sanctuary. So keep a lookout for every second Sunday from now until the end of the year will be there will be another one. And so this program is about food. And it's similar to what Reverend Adam's sermon was about. So that was a really good introduction to what we're going to be talking about today. I thought I would start with a little poem from a little book by Thich Nhat Hanh. If you ever have seen these little pocket books, he has a bunch of them and they're really worthwhile reading. So he has a book called How to Eat. And I chose a short reading from this book. It's called Choosing What to Eat. And it says, our way of eating and producing food can be very violent to other species, whether plant or animal, to our own bodies and to the earth. Or our way of growing, distributing, and eating food can be part of creating a larger healing. We get to choose. With each meal, we make choices that help or harm the planet. What shall I eat today is a very deep question. You might want to ask yourself that question every morning. So Dan, if you could pull up the PowerPoint with the slide number 2. So as Reverend Adam alluded to in the sermon, we are taking our direction from the UUA Green Sanctuary materials, and the resource down there is really well worth reading. And in fact, there will be a resource list that I'm working on that it will be out and available on the website probably within a week or so. But the UUA has a lot of information about what they call ethical eating, and it talks about the moral consequences of our food choices. And it talks about things like the way we raise or grow our food, the way we buy our food, the way we consume our food has impact on the planet. And that's really what the focus is on in this presentation today. Dan, if you can go to the next slide. This is actually a quote that Reverend Adam read in his sermon as well. We don't, the UUA and we don't want to advocate for a single dietary approach. There are a variety of ways to make good choices about what we eat, and it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. The first step really is to be knowledgeable about the foods that we choose, the foods themselves, and then to also understand where those foods come from, how were they raised, how are they grown, how are they transported, how are workers treated, and so I think, referring you to this document, I think is a good thing, that you look at that, and there's a tremendous amount of information on that document. See on the next slide. So simply said, our food choices are complicated. It isn't just about the food that we choose. It isn't just about whether we're going to eat meat or not, or whether we're going to eat bananas or avocados or not. It's, thinking about where does that food come from? Is there a lot of packaging or not a lot of packaging? How is it grown? How is it raised? Again, it could add how are the workers treated when they're working on growing and raising the food or transporting the food. Next slide, Dan. The other important thing that we want everyone to know, which we feel really strongly about this in terms of this food program, in terms of the transportation program that we did a couple of months ago, and all the programs that we're going to be doing over the course of the of the next 6 months is this is a no judgment zone. Thich Nhat Hanh says we get to choose. We should be informed about our food and where it's coming from and all of that, but we get to choose how we do this. There are a lot of variables to think about. There are a lot of factors to consider when we're making these decisions, but we are the people who are making the choices, and we don't want to make judgments toward ourselves or toward other people with regard to what food choices we make or what food choices other people make. So thank you. Next slide. The next slide, I'm going to turn, next 2 slides actually, we're going to turn over to Ed to talk about.
Okay, thank you, Linda. We've listed here the goals of this workshop. We hope to meet these as we have our speakers. We're going to be focusing particularly on our carbon footprint in our food choices, because of course that's the theme that links almost all of the workshops that we're doing through in this Green Sanctuary program. We'll be relying on Reverend Adam to make that connection between our UU values and food choices. We'll be encouraging everybody who's participating in this workshop or attending this workshop to, at the end, to just make at least one small step to reducing your carbon footprint through the information that we'll be providing to you. And as Linda said, you know, we have agency. We're in charge of the decisions we make with regard to food, and I think that's important. Next slide, please, Dan. So here are the themes that we'll cover today. It'll be like a virtual panel discussion. We'll talk about Reverend Adam. We'll be talking about UU values, climate, and food. We'll be talking about the benefits of buying and eating locally. We have a really interesting discussion on different food choices that people have made in their lives. We'll be talking about how ways that we can all reduce the amount of food that is wasted in our consumption. So with that said, Dan, if you could bring up the next slide, and we'll start with our first theme, which will require Reverend Adam to be present along with me.
I am here and ready when you are.
Great. Dan, can you, well, again, this theme 1, this is regarding our
I cannot hear you, I'm sorry.
Sorry? Reverend Adam, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yep.
Great. Dan, if you could please bring up Reverend Adam on the screen. Dan, can you hear me?
Give us 1 second, we're getting there.
Okay, thanks.
Chat box. We realized that I'm not named Adam Robersmith on the thing, so we're having to find my Zoom box and pull me out. So we'll get there in a second.
You know, in the interest of time, perhaps we could begin our discussion, and then as Dan's able to bring you up, how does that sound?
Yep, let's do it.
Great. Reverend Adam, as Linda said, you know, in the service today, the readings, and in your sermon, you really, pun intended, you did set the table very well for this workshop, and we really do appreciate that. All of the food themes that were brought together through music, through readings, through your sermon, really were just very relevant. And so I wanted to ask you a couple of questions as prompts. First is, do we as UUs, do we have a moral responsibility to consider the ethical and the environmental implications of our food choices? Do we have a special responsibility?
I think I'm not sure if it's a special responsibility. I think it is as part of our principles and purposes, right? As one of those 7 principles that we hold to in our congregations that we have promised to consider. We have things in there that call us to pay attention to all of our lives, and food and eating is definitely one of those. As one of the readings indicated, this is thinking about food and how we use, consume, share, distribute, raise. Food is one of the most everyday, most present ways that we participate in the 7th principle. Certainly, you know, in the ways that we breathe and drink and all of those ways too, but eating is something that the vast majority of us are doing daily, often multiple times a day.
Mhm.
And in that way, it behooves us. It is a calling for us. It is a promise for us to pay attention. But it also fits in other places where we talk about justice, where we talk about the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Yes, it's free. Yes, there are lots and lots of different possibilities, many ways to go that we can find for ourselves, but it is also a responsible search for truth and meaning. And what that means is that it's not just about what we want to do. It's also about what we know makes a difference for the betterment of the world, that we take responsibility for our choices and how they impact others, other people, other species, the world as a whole.
Great. What is the role of gratitude in, particularly at meals? You know, you spoke, you introduced your sermon with, you know, the practice of praying at meals and when you were growing up. And I had a similar experience. My parents, my father would lead us in a very brief service, but actually there never was an expression of gratitude there. It was asking for blessings for the food, for us and for the food, but gratitude wasn't expressed. Do you think that there's, you know, there's a role, there's an importance of being aware and grateful for the food that's there? It's so ever present, as you said, but still, it's almost a miracle that it's there at each meal.
It seems to me that if we're not actively grateful for the things that help us to live, we're doing life wrong.
Mhm.
You know, I'm grateful every time I can take a breath of fresh air, especially these days, if I can do that with other people.
Mhm.
There are things that happen that make us aware of the things that we otherwise take for granted. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons why people do have a practice of praying before meals. It makes that moment, like, it calls our attention to what's actually happening, even if there's not a particular expression of gratitude in that moment. But I would say where there can be, adding that in makes sense. You know, when we think about the Buddhist conversations and instructions to do everything mindfully, including eat, that mindfulness is not just about, like, you take a bite and you think chewing.
Mhm.
That's one thing you can do, but it takes the joy out of eating, I think, right? It removes the concept of pleasure and flavor if all you're thinking is chewing. Instead, mindfulness can also be taking it in and feeling the textures, sensing the flavors, sensing the tastes, because they're a little bit different, actually.
Mhm.
Being able to recognize what it is that you are taking in, and being able to understand that it has been grown, harvested, prepared in some way for you, whether you have done that work or other people that you have never met have done that work. I think if we're paying attention, we can't help but be grateful for it. That doesn't mean that we don't also think about justice, right? It doesn't mean that we don't also think about, so where did it come from? Sometimes the only thing we can eat is the only thing we can find. If we're on a road trip and there's been nothing and suddenly there is a fast food place that we would otherwise never go to, but the truth is you have to eat or you're not going to be able to continue your drive. Many of us will make the choice to stop and eat, and we can be grateful that we are being nourished, while still recognizing the complex choices and challenges of that moment. So it's kind of an all of the above, I think.
Okay, I have one last question. I could talk all day with you about this, but in limited time, I used to think that food choices were simple. That if I bought organic, I was doing good enough. But I know you've pointed out in discussions with the Green Sanctuary team, it's not that simple. That you have to consider a lot of things, including, is it industrial organic? Is it monoculture organic? Just what? So it's not at all simple. As our slide said, it's very complicated. So how do you balance all of these different, competing interests? Local versus distant, organic versus conventional, small scale versus industrial, plant versus meat. How do you keep all of this straight in your head?
At some point, what I did was I started to look at the various options and said, okay, so how can I keep making better choices in every moment that I can?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I found is that the more local I purchase, the better I feel about what I'm doing, the smaller my carbon footprint is, right? So if I'm purchasing from small producers locally, I am contributing to fewer carbon resources to get me my food, to produce it. I'm contributing, especially if I choose more organic, more sustainable farming. I am making choices to limit the amount of harm that's being done through herbicides and pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm constantly trying to do is move away from industrial farming and industrial food production. I'm trying to move away from getting my food from great distances. And I'm trying to both increase what I get in terms of my own health, but I'm also looking for things that are regenerative agriculture where I can. And I'm also thinking about budget. What can I actually afford, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also, what tastes good. Just because something is made in all the ways that sound right, if the product is awful, I don't want to support that.
Right.
Because I know that really good food can be done in very sustainable ways. I also produce my own. I don't produce all of my own food, but I definitely have my own vegetable and herb gardens, my own fruit plants. And so where I can, I do things to sustain my land and help my land to sustain me. This is not always easy for everybody, but what I do is I look at what choices can I make that are good for my body and good for the world, good for the land that I live on, and good for my neighbors. And in that way, I'm also thinking about climate. I'm also thinking about not contributing to worsening climate change because I'm looking at what is local, what helps the ecosystem and my animal and vegetable and fungus and bird and insect neighbors, all of that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm constantly trying to think about what can I do that is better than what I did the day before. And that doesn't mean I do it perfectly, and it doesn't mean that everything is always exactly right. Those choices are choices I can't always make, but I continually and consistently make better choices wherever I can. And by having a sense of what the spectrum is, right? Industrial versus small farms, food shipped from around the world to food that I literally could walk around the corner from my house to get from a CSA. I think about those spectrums and I constantly try to move toward what I think is the better end of those spectrums.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll now, I guess, move on to theme number 2. Linda, that'll be you.
Thank you. So for theme number 2, we're going to be talking about food options or food choices. What are some possible options? So we have 3 people that we'd like to address these questions to. We have Vicki Sklar, Jeff Tyler, and Reverend Adam, who each have made somewhat different choices about their food. And so I'd like if each of you, and I wonder, is it possible to get 3 of, me and 3 others on the screen on the side, Dan? If that's possible, that would be great. If not, It's okay. But it's not possible. Okay.
Sorry, you can't choose. I can spotlight one of you at a time.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So what I'd like to do is to ask each of them one at a time to talk a little bit about what food choices they have made, why they've made those choices, and what has worked for them around that, and what some of the challenges might have been or might continue to be around that. So again, it's Jeff and Vicky and Reverend Adam.
Who would you like to have start?
How about Jeff?
Fine. I and my family moved to a plant-based diet in August of 19. And I can tell you that I did it pretty close to kicking and screaming. Janice was off at a conference and kept calling back and telling us how fabulous all the vegan food was that she was eating and how good it was for us. And I kept saying, there's no way in hell I'm going to do this. I have cut red meat out. I have cut this out. I have cut that out. All I cook now is chicken, and I am not going to give up meat. And she came back and had me watch a couple of programs. One was called Forks Over Knives. They have a fabulous website. They used to have their show on Netflix. After 10 years, Netflix decided to drop them, but you can still watch it on their website. And equally importantly, it was one called Prescription Nutrition. The value of prescription nutrition, it was still talking about the health value of a plant-based diet. But what I took from it was it introduced me to Rich Landau. He and his wife, Kate Jacoby, run a series of restaurants that are completely vegan. And they started to show me as a cook how I could cook a plant-based diet and not give up good food. Because as Adam pointed out when he was talking, something might be produced perfectly well ethically when it comes to CO2 emissions and everything. But if it doesn't taste good, you're not going to want to eat it. You might eat it once and say, this isn't good, but this is dinner. Okay, fine. But you're not going to make that again. And so what I have done is worked towards making food do two things. First of all, it always has to taste good. And let's be honest, not everything's been successful. I do remember one night I made a vegan pho, or pho, I always get the pronunciation wrong. And it was so bad that I went out and bought my family a pizza just so that we could have something decent. But that was one night. So not everything you try is going to be successful. But I have had a large number of successful dinners. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that I am not going to spend 3 hours cooking dinner. I like to spend 40, 45 minutes cooking dinner, and I don't want to spend my day doing it. And so the crucial thing is it has to taste good, and it has to be something I can cook quickly. And I had such I developed a range of recipes to the point that in the spring of Janice asked me to put together, share my recipe collection with some of her students. I then said, this is going to be something that's going to be ongoing. I know Janice. And so I put it together as a recipe booklet. That recipe booklet has now grown to a book of more than 100 recipes. And I now teach a plant-based cooking course through Farmington Continuing Ed. Anybody is welcome to sign up for it. It's done by Zoom because I tried to find a decent place to do it from, and it's too far away to find a place that's set up to teach cooking properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Jeff, I know you and your family have done this primarily for health reasons. Can you just talk a little bit about how you made the transition in terms of, for people who may want to become vegan? How do you make that transition in your kitchen? Just a little bit about that.
In the kitchen. So like I said, first of all, I have a whole collection of recipe books. my collection used to have one out of 50 books, used to have one vegan book. Now it's the omnivore books are all in the closet. And I probably have 25, 30 different books. You read a recipe, you have to, it's useful if you are already comfortable in the kitchen, so that you can read a recipe and understand quickly if this is going to be a 3-hour recipe or a 30-minute recipe. And any number of the books that the book that I started with is a book called Veg. It's Rich Landau and Kate Jacoby's book. But when you read that, you also have to understand some of the recipes, because some of them are phenomenally easy. But if you don't understand the recipe, you won't understand that it's easy. My dad read one of the recipes that I suggested to him that I will literally make in 5 minutes. And he was just completely intimidated. You know, the key is you have to understand, first of all, half of your time cooking is going to be with the knife, not the fry pan. And the quicker you can chop an onion or a Brussels sprout, the better off you are. You're going to get dinner on the table faster. And then, you know, and then whenever you look at a recipe, you say, okay, so those are the vegetables that go in. What are the flavorings? Is there garlic? Are there herbs? Are there, I do a lot more with sriracha sauce now, but are there other sauces? And understand that the sauce is as crucial to the dinner as the vegetables that go in it. Because let's be honest, if all you're doing is flavoring something with onion and salt, it's not going to be that interesting. But a little balsamic vinegar goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there are things like, one of the things you need to appreciate is the flavorings in the vast majority of the American diet, if you are sort of fat and salt. And neither of those are good for your health, but what's more is you're missing out on so many flavorings if you stick to that. So, you know, pay attention. You need more than just garlic. And be willing to try stuff like there's a lot of flavoring with maple syrup and honey and things like that, which would be excellent. And I understand honey's not vegan, but it's plant-based. And yes, you're stealing from the bees, but you know what? We got to take our nourishment from somewhere. We're not plants ourselves. So
Certainly good to be open, right?
answer what you
Thank
are
you.
looking
Yes,
for.
that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Vicky, if we can get you to talk a little bit about your choices. I know, Vicky, you are, in your family of 3, are the only vegan. And so what are the challenges there? I can closely identify with that in being in a family of, our kids don't live with us, but when they come for holidays or dinners, we have 2 who are keto people, and one is a vegan, and the rest of us are kind of in the middle, and it's challenging. So maybe talk a little bit about, you know,
Sure.
how do you deal with those challenges?
Sure. It's very challenging at times, but we've kind of grown into it and have kind of learned to live peacefully together. So the way we do, I follow a plant-based diet, and have been actually a vegetarian, vegetarian with some fish early on. For most of my adult life, I've been eating primarily a vegetarian diet. So for me, the transition to a vegan diet wasn't all that difficult. It was just a matter of giving up the remainder of the animal products I was still eating. But my family, when Jeff was talking about there's no way in hell that I'm going to give up eating meat, that's pretty much how it is with my husband and my daughter, who actually has moved out on her own. So it's just Steve and I here together. But the way we make it work is I cook what I want to eat. If he wants to eat what I'm making, he's more than welcome. There's usually plenty for him to have. And initially that was kind of difficult, but as we've kind of evolved into this, he does eat more and more plant-based meals. So he may just eat the plant-based meal, He may decide he doesn't really care for what I'm preparing, and he may decide to make something on his own, or he may eat my plant-based meal and then add a little bit of meat or something on the side for himself. So we've kind of worked it out that way. I think it was harder for him when I decided that I was going to eat pretty much a vegan plant-based diet. You know, concerned, he really likes to go out to eat and try different places. And his concern was, what are you going to be able to eat? And in this day and age, there's actually a lot of options, thankfully. A lot of times if we're going out, if you go to a good local restaurant and you call ahead, I find that they most of the time are very accommodating. So if I call and say, you know, do you have vegan stuff? Usually I'll go to the website, see if they have something to offer. And if I don't see anything that look other than salad, I might call and see what kind of offerings they have. But I find that most of the time, a decent restaurant is going to be pretty accommodating.
Mhm. And why did you choose a vegan lifestyle, Vicki?
For pretty much all of my life, well, I'm a nurse. And so, but even before I decided to go into nursing, I was pretty health conscious. So, and we have a lot of heart disease and cancer and other things in my family. So it just made sense to me to be very careful about what I eat. Now, I'm not always real careful about what I eat, but most of the time I am.
Reverend Adam,
So
if you can talk a
If-
little bit about your
if you
food choices.
heard my sermon this morning, you heard a little bit about the choices that I've made. But I'm happy to kind of share a little bit more specifically here. One of my favorite comments about food and food choices is from Michael Pollan. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So the idea of a plant-based diet, that can mean many things. It might mean that, you know, you are thoroughly vegan. It might mean that you're a fruitarian, literally eating only things that do not kill plants. It might mean that you're vegetarian and supplementing that with a few other things. It might mean that you are a plant-based omnivore, right? That the vast majority of your meals are plant-based in some way, and that meat is either a nutritional supplement or a flavor supplement, depending. I happen to really love vegetables. I love growing them. I love eating them. And so we definitely do plenty of that. But my partner and I are both very aware of Chinese medicine, and we're also both very aware of our own bodies. We've tried different things at different times. We've tried to do without meat. We've tried to do different kinds of vegetables to see what happens. And what we've both found is that without some animal protein in our diets, both of us are actually more unhealthy. It's not good for us. It's also not good for us to be eating exclusively that. So, or majority of that. So what we've done over time is kind of found our way of making that choice to a balance in our meals that works and that keeps us functioning well and living well and eating well. One of the questions that you have on your slide here is, how does meat production impact the climate? And actually, that's one of the things that makes a difference in how we make our food choices. So when I was growing up, my parents would get half a steer and half a hog from a local farmer that was sent off to be butchered, and then was something that we would keep in freezers in our basement and then thaw throughout the year. We knew the farmer, we knew how they raised their animals. And so when we got here, what Don and I found was that there are actually some local CSAs, community supported agriculture. There are lots of them for vegetables, which is great. We do that every summer, in addition to the things that we grow ourselves. But we're actually part of a livestock CSA that does beef and pork, and does it in a sustainably raised, no antibiotics, no hormones, et cetera, fashion. It is a small farm rather than a mega farm. And so what we're doing, again, is stepping away from those kinds of industrial sorts of farming situations, which are incredibly detrimental, whether whether you're doing vegetable farming on an industrial scale or livestock farming on an industrial scale. Both of them are actually really problematic. So what we try to do is get our meat when we do in the most sustainable way we can from someplace local. We buy our eggs from local farm producers right near our house. And then we run with lots and lots of vegetables. We're very fortunate in that our local grocery store has plenty of great choices for us. And then we do the CSA. I do some freezing and some canning and some pre-preparation so that that is kind of always ready for us and easy to use. It also means that when I have bones or other things, I save those and I make my own stock from it. So a big part of what I'm constantly trying to do is figure out, if I'm going to be killing things, how do I use as much of that as possible and do it in a way that is very limited on its impact on the world? I think too that the benefits and challenges of the choices for me are figuring out, like, where can I make the best possible choices, knowing that occasionally I can't manage it. Knowing that sometimes I'm not going to be able to follow my highest ideals in terms of what I need to get or what I choose to get. But this is one of those spots where I feel like I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be the best I can the majority of the time. And know that my choices are not going to be the same as other people's choices. Following something that touches on a traditional Chinese medical system does not add up to exactly what a Western medical system might say, or to what other people would choose. That's okay. We don't all have to choose the same things, but where I can, over time, have learned to balance my diet so that I am as healthy as possible and helping the world to be as healthy as possible, that's what's made me feel good about the choices that I make.
Can I ask you, aside from the issues with regard to transportation of food that you would buy in the store, I mean meat, how would you compare the food that you get from the livestock CSA to buying organic food from Whole Foods or from Stop and Shop or somewhere like that?
It is, frankly, much, much cheaper to do what I'm doing. The per pound cost for the meat that I get through the CSA is way less expensive than what I would have to spend if I was doing organic, sustainable, even regenerative from Whole Foods or any place else. The other reality is that I'm buying from a local producer. I don't need to be contributing to Jeff Bezos, even if it's organic. I'm much happier helping a local family farm to thrive, especially if they're making better choices. And hopefully that drives other local farms to do the same sort of thing. But yeah, I actually spend way less money on my livestock CSA than I would on getting things from the store, every week.
Mm-hmm. That's great. If you could send me that resource so I can add to the resource list.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, so I think Ed, you're on next for theme number 3.
Yes, thank you, Linda. So this actually is a really good segue from what Reverend Adam was just talking about, the CSAs. This is all about the benefits of eating locally, and you can do this in a number of different ways. We'll have a couple of different voices here, but I'd like to just continue, if I could, with Reverend Adam to focus on the CSAs, because not everybody may be familiar with the logistics of a CSA. How does it work? How often do you get your food? Can you get it year-round? Do you have to pick it up? Is it delivered? Are there challenges with, being overwhelmed with like radishes because they're, in season, and that's what's in the box that shows up for you? So maybe you could just give people a kind of a snapshot of just what are the ins and outs, the logistics of being a member of a CSA.
Sure. So CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And it's basically a way of a community saying to a farm and a farmer, we will make sure that you have what you need to produce food for us ahead of time. It is kind of like a share in stock, in that if it's a great year, you get a lot. If it's kind of a bad year, you don't get so much. But if it's a good year, if the Dow's doing really well, everybody who's got stock does well. It's a similar sort of thing with the farming. So we buy our share in advance of the time that we're getting it from the farms that we work with, and then we end up with deliveries, or we go to pick it up, and it's different for each CSA. So some CSAs have a weekly pickup, some deliver. Sometimes you go to the farm to pick it up. Sometimes you go to a person's house or a local, central site. Some do monthly. So our livestock CSA does a monthly pickup. And they have two options. You can either get a larger share or a half share. And it just depends on how many pounds of food that you want. The same thing is true for the CSA. We choose a CSA that's literally around the corner from us. And we do the longest version of that, but we do a half share of vegetables, because otherwise we would just never be able to get through everything that we would get. Occasionally we supplement it by getting things at a farmer's market or at the grocery store. But largely what we get is plenty. And what it means is that every week we have to start looking at, okay, what have we received? And that determines what it is that we're going to be making for the week. If we have an abundance of radishes, I may make quick pickled radishes. I may have radishes for salad that, I might throw them into some ramen soup or something like that. If I get lots of kale, I'm going to be figuring out different ways to eat kale. Fortunately, I love kale, so that's easy. But it does vary week to week. So if you're somebody who needs like a kind of consistency, I always have, 2 cucumbers, 4 tomatoes, et cetera, a CSA may not be the best thing for you. But a CSA gives you what is in season, what can be grown well locally. So some years, the cabbages are amazing, and other years there's a drought. And so the cabbages aren't great and there's not a lot of pumpkins to be had, but there's other stuff instead. So CSAs kind of have a little built-in uncertainty. And to me, actually, that's part of the fun, is trying to figure out what it is that I get and what sorts of things I'm going to be coming up with, what kinds of recipes that I look for.
Great. Thank you very much. The benefits of buying your food locally are really relevant to the idea of reducing our carbon footprint in our food choices, which is, of course, the theme throughout these workshops. So there are so many benefits to buying locally. You don't have all of the transportation charges and costs involved, and all of the emissions that are involved with transporting that food. But there are different ways of growing or buying locally. Katy Perry is in our audience, and Katie, I believe you mentioned that you are involved with a local community garden. I wonder if you might speak to your experience of where that garden is, what's grown, and what are the benefits of joining a community garden?
Sure, thanks, Ed. So my husband and I, we actually work and live at a boarding school. So it's our own little self-contained community. And we have our own community garden within the school. And it's part of my job to help to coordinate and run that garden. And so one of the nice things about a community garden is it's a plot of land. Perhaps you live in a place that you don't have a big backyard, or you don't want the commitment of having, a big garden plot that you are solely responsible for taking care of. So community gardens are often set up as literally a sort of a little commune, right? So many people can work together on this one plot of land. A lot of times they're divided up into individual plots. And so in our garden, we have 20 raised beds, and a lot of the people who participate in the garden will have 1 or 2 raised beds where they can raise whatever they want. There's, a central water supply. There's all the tools there that they need. They can opt in or opt out in different years. This year I feel like gardening. This year I don't feel like gardening. And there's a hoop house. So it's a covered sort of, one of those covered plastic greenhouses. So if people would like to extend their growing season, they can participate with growing some things within the hoop house. And then we have some other sort of like community plots where we grow things, like we have a strawberry bed, and we have a giant garlic patch where I grow a couple hundred bulbs of garlic every year. We have a cut your own flower patch, which is just lovely. And then it's so not only does it bring people together to raise their own food, but it brings people together to enjoy that process of working together with the land. We will have community work days where, you show up and you weed together, and maybe somebody brings, some beverages or some food to enjoy. So it brings people together to enjoy working together in the land. It does help to strengthen our community around that process of growing things, which I find, first of all, there's an educational component to it as well. And that if we can get the students to come over into the garden, it's always a win-win for everybody. Sometimes it takes a little cajoling to get them over, but once they're there, they tend to really enjoy the experience. And something about raising your own food, it's just hopeful, right? Like it just gives you this feeling of, it's kind of that delayed gratification, but then when you get it, it's just so incredibly rewarding. And the food just always tastes better. So participating in a community garden is, I think, a wonderful way to get into gardening, to learn from others, to experience what it's like to raise your own food without that huge commitment of like digging up your whole backyard.
Fantastic. It sounds like it's been a really great experience for your family. I'll
add that most towns have community gardens that you can utilize. I think West Hartford has 4 of them in various parts of town that people can sign up for a particular plot of land of a particular size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So definitely something that if you're interested and you don't have the room on your property, certainly something to look into. I wanted to wrap up this segment in singing the praises of local farmers markets. We live in West Hartford, and we love to frequent the farmers market in town. It's in the center of town for lots of reasons. We live pretty close to town, to the center, so that I'm able to bike there safely. And with racks on the back of my bike, I can go there and back with a 0 carbon footprint. It gives me a little bit of exercise at the same time. But I love shopping there for multiple reasons. One of the most important is it gives me an opportunity to meet and interact with the people who are growing the food that we are buying and that we're going to ultimately be eating. And in that interaction, I can and I do speak to them about the agricultural practices that they're following. There's almost always at least one organic farm there represented at a booth, and I'll talk to them about their practices. There's another big booth with lots of produce. They're not organic, but they implement IPM, integrated pest management. And I've spoken to them about what that means and how they've reduced the pesticide and herbicide use on their farm to an absolute minimum just to handle outbreaks. I've even spoken to a chicken farmer about the practices on their poultry farm down in, I believe it's in Old Lyme. And he told me about how they have these portable pens that they move the chickens around in so that they're grazing on a rotation basis, moving them around the pasture. So the chickens are every few days getting, you know, a new section of pasture to feed on. At the same time, they're through their manure, you know, they're fertilizing the soil, enriching the soil, and you know, they don't overeat in any one area. They're constantly rotating around. So, you know, all of that connection to the farmers, I think, is really important for me. And as a final benefit, you know, when I'm there, I always run into one or more friends or neighbors and just have a chance to chat. So in the same way that Katie was talking about the community aspect of a community garden, I think it really is present at the local farmers market, and encourage, you know, all of us to shop there as much as you can and support the local farmers. Okay. That wraps up theme 3, and Linda, I think you're going to take us to the finish line.
Yes, our final theme is food waste and composting. And so, you know, I think about this a lot, you know, the amount of food that we waste if we're not very organized or we don't plan. You know, the pumpkin that was sitting on our front porch that you have to, that is really not edible after it's frozen. And, you know, what do you do with it? And so I think it's important to talk about, you know, how much food do we waste and how can we waste less food? And so the ideas of composting and, you know, other ways of reducing food waste. So we have again, Reverend Adam and Ed and Katie to talk a little bit about this. So can anyone speak to how much of our food is thrown out? We really don't have any numbers on that, but what percentage of our food?
Linda, I was doing some reading today online, and several different sources, including from the USDA, were citing the same statistics, that 30 to 40% of our food supply ends up in municipal waste stream. Now that's everything from the growing, the transportation, the production, and then the selling and the consumption. So there's lots of different places along that chain where food will be spoiled, overgrown, or rot, or for different reasons will end up, it's not the perfect aesthetic condition, so grocery stores will not sell that. So it's an incredible amount, 30 to 40%, considering the amount of hunger that exists in the country. It's just staggering that much of our food supply is ending up as waste.
Right. So let's have people talk a little bit about what options there are for reducing food waste. I know I can say we have one of these little containers on our kitchen counter, and we've been composting for a long time. When we lived in a house, it was, we had the room to have a big compost bin that we would transfer the little compost bin into. And then a year ago or so, we moved to a condominium, and we were concerned initially about how we would continue to do that. But fortunately, we had many other like-minded people who were interested in getting a compost bin that we could jointly share, a big one, like the one on the right. And so we do that. And so just again, can we have some people talk about how they do composting, or do they do composting? Maybe Ed, would you like to start?
I'd be happy to. I don't know if here people can see great. For years, we've done backyard composting. We still have the 2 compost bins that I built years ago. And those are great. Wherever feasible, I encourage people to put them in to reduce your solid waste stream. But there are limitations to backyard composting. There's lots of food scraps or food items that can't go into a compost because it'll spoil the composting process. And for a number of years now, we've been subscribing to a commercial food scrap collection and composting service. They're local in the Hartford area. They're called Blue Earth. You can find them online. And they have such a variety of food items, food scraps that they encourage you to give to them and they pick up. Those would include things like meat, bones, fish, eggshells, dairy, food, soiled paper, like incidental oils and fats that may, find their way onto paper products. So a much greater variety of food scraps can be composted. They provide subscribers with, I think it's a 5-gallon container with a biodegradable liner. We fill this up each week. I think it's a 2-week subscription. You can do as well every other week. But we fill this up to the top every week. We put it out on, near the sidewalk, and they pick it up and then provide us with a clean container, and which we then start filling up for the following week. They offer, you can purchase compost that's been produced in their facility from the scraps that they collect. So they make it just really, really frictionless and so easy for you to participate. And by the way, it is a commercial service. I have no financial interest in Blue Earth. I just think that it's a great way of closing the loop. And I will tell you that we never, ever throw out food items. It's all used, or we don't use scraps or composted. So we've reduced the waste that we throw out in our garbage bin every week phenomenally by participating there. So I encourage everybody to do the same.
Can I make one comment? So pre-pandemic, I looked into using Blue Earth for fellowship hour waste, and the cost was approaching $1,400 a year for the church, and so we opted not to. But if somehow our committee could, or the Green Sanctuary Committee could find that sort of money from the congregation somewhere, it'd be something that, in fact, would be great for the congregation to do. We chose not to because it's very cost effective for home use, but for our particular congregation at the time, it didn't fit our budget. But I was a big fan of the idea of using the service.
Ed, can you give us a sense of how much it costs?
Jane, do you know what it is?
A year?
Yeah, or for every week.
I don't know for the years, like 250.
Somewhere in the range, my wife Jane says somewhere in the range of $250 per year, and we have the weekly pickup. It certainly fits within our budget. It's not onerous at all.
I assume you can do that. You can do a two system thing, right? You could do compost for the things that, the raw vegetables and things like that, and do a separate compost for things that Blue Earth would take. I assume you could do that.
You could, but you'll pay the same fee for them to pick up. So it's just easier for us. We just keep this Tupperware on our countertop and we just fill it, during the day and just put it right into the bin. So there's really no need or even any benefit to separating it. They're going to produce compost from it. They're closing the loop. So you could if you want to.
Okay.
I'm just going to jump in really quick. I believe also with Blue Earth that they're also producing energy from the gas emissions from the composting. So not only, is it composting the food, reducing the food waste, creating the compost, which then can be used, and go back into the earth, but they also are creating energy. And in regards to Jeff's comment, so one of the goals, this might be skipping ahead, but one of the goals of having these educational programs is to get people excited about some different themes. And at the end of this year, we will be having conversations about 3 separate campaigns that we'll be working on into the future for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And so if people are really excited about food as a way to reduce our community's impact on the climate, then that will be the opportunity to look at those individual initiatives, as hopefully we're all back together in the church and possibly actually generating food waste at the church again.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Katie. Yeah.
Mhm.
Reverend Adam, I think you have some thoughts about composting as well.
I do. And that's because I am both a consumer of food and a gardener. And so I grew up in a house where we grew a lot of our own food. My parents had multiple gardens and different kinds of gardens, and we always had a compost pile, a mulch pile that just kind of sat and got turned over and turned into things that we could put back into the garden. And as I got older and moved out on my own, I decided to do a little bit more intentional composting. And so here in Connecticut, I live out in the woods, and composting is challenging with bears and other such animals that might want to find what's in there. And so I've had to learn how to do two different kinds of composting. I do an outdoor composting system that has 3 bins that helps kind of cycle leaves, garden waste, and certain kinds of kitchen vegetable scraps that I can throw into that. I can throw eggshells into it. They often say, don't put citrus into your compost, and I do, but I also use the wood ash and the charcoal from my wood stove to mix in with that and reduce the acids so that I can actually get most everything into the compost and have it be healthy. The thing that I don't put out into my outdoor compost are apple cores, berries, melon rinds, anything that's sweet, because that will attract bears like nothing else. And so instead, I also have a vermicomposting system in the house. And what that means is that I actually use what's called red wigglers. They're just little worms to break down certain kinds of food that is better composted indoors and away from attracting animals that might want to dig through my compost. So I have 2 systems, and both of those systems result in compost that I can use in my garden. The vermicomposting results in wonderful stuff that is fantastic for my vegetables. The outdoor composting also is good for that, but it's good for the rest of my gardens as well. But because of where I live, I had to make a choice. I didn't want to do Blue Earth because I wanted to be able to generate my own compost and have better control over it. But what I have had to do is figure out what sorts of things I can do out of doors and what sorts of things I do indoors in order to be most effective. But it's a wonderful practice. And if you're a gardener, being able to create your own compost and not have to buy it from somebody else is a really, really wonderful thing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's interesting. And last but not least, we have Ed is going to talk a little bit about meal planning. And then I think Katie maybe will talk. Oh yeah, Katie will talk a little bit about meal kits. So final 2. Tell us a little bit about your amazing meal planning system.
Dan, could you bring up the next slide, please? Here we go. So many years ago, I realized that our family had some real challenges when it came to buying food, shopping for food, and planning for meals, dinners. We would go shopping every week, but we didn't have a really strong idea of just what we were going to make during that week. So we would buy, just sort of like the staples that we would use regularly. And then invariably, several nights a week, we would stare at the open refrigerator, look at the ingredients that are in there, and ask ourselves, well, what the heck are we going to make for dinner tonight? Many times we had most of the ingredients we needed for what we wanted to make, but we didn't have all of them. So we ended up going to the grocery store multiple times after our big shopping day to get whatever we didn't have. The other thing that was happening was that we were buying foods, produce that we didn't use that week, and oftentimes those vegetables would spoil in the refrigerator. We'd end up throwing them out. So over the years, I've devised this menu planning tool, which you see on the screen, which I think of as intentional meal planning. And if you see in the upper right side, you'll see it highlighted in pink, the meals. We will sit down. My wife does, we do division of labor. My wife sits down with all of our cookbooks, and she will choose 7 meals that we'll make for the following 7 days. And in going through each one, we'll look at the ingredients list, ingredients that were required, and then see whether we need to buy any of those. Do we have eggplants if we want to make eggplant parmesan, and so on. So she'll fill out this sort of shopping list just by going through the meals that we're going to be making that week. The other thing that we do is at the bottom, it's not showing on the screen, but we have a little space where we keep an inventory of food items that we're either running out of or we have run out of, which we need to buy. And then those serve as the basis for the following week's shopping list. So to make sure that we have in stock what we've run out of. The final thing about this list is that I've organized it so that it corresponds to the way that I move through the Whole Foods here in West Hartford, so that it just makes my time in the store much more efficient, basically organized by aisles. And these are the food items that we most often, use and buy. So it's saved us a lot of time in the store. And I will tell you that we hardly ever throw out food. When we have leftovers, we now use clear glass containers. So they're obvious, the leftovers. We don't store them anymore in old yogurt containers, which you can't see through, and then you don't know if the food's spoiling. So we hardly ever throw out food because it's spoiled. And when we do, we will compost it. So happy to share that with anybody who might want to do the same and or modify it to your use.
Sure, with that. Thank you, Ed.
Sure.
And then finally, Katie, would you like to talk a little bit about meal kits?
Sure. I am super impressed, Ed, with your meal planning.
Yes.
I don't have that kind of skill. And so Jamie, my husband, and I decided this year we are empty nesters really for the first time. And so for most of the time, there's just the 2 of us at home, and neither one of us really enjoys meal planning or shopping or any of that, but we do enjoy eating really good food. And so we decided to try a meal plan kit. We've been using Blue Apron. There's lots of different kits out there, but I had really mixed feelings about it. I was like, I don't know, they're so bad for the environment, all the packaging, the delivery, right? That's just really feeling very, very unsure about it. So I did a lot of research, and it turns out that, either it's a wash kind of environmentally, if you consider all the different factors that go into it, or actually at times the meal planning kits can come in with a lower carbon footprint than going to the grocery store, of course, depending on how you shop. 3 months out of the year, we do our community garden, we do farmers markets, farm stands, we'll buy locally, we'll support all the local farmers. When we get back to school, there's just not as many of those options, right? And we're super busy. So I wanted to just share really quickly about our Blue Apron subscription as something that, at least for now, it's working really well for us and we're really enjoying. Will we do it forever? I don't know. But once a week, we get a box. This is our Blue Apron box. It comes delivered to us. There is some packaging. This is the liner that goes into it. There's an ice pack that comes with it. One of the reasons we chose Blue Apron is because that ice pack is a frozen starch solution that once it melts, it just goes right down the drain. There's nothing about the ice pack that's going to be harmful to the environment. And then inside, you get things like this little meal kit. So this is dinner tonight. This is, I have over here, saffron risotto, and it's got, you know, all the different little ingredients that you need. And what's the saffron risotto? With these peppers, so this is the vegetable, these are shishito peppers. I'm not really a foodie. I enjoy good food, but I wouldn't go to the grocery store and buy shishito peppers. I don't know what they are or what they do, but with Blue Apron, I have the confidence of I'm going to make a really delicious saffron risotto with shishito peppers that tastes like something you'd get in like a fancy restaurant. And I don't really have to know how to do it. Along with the food, I'll show you, you get these like recipe cards. So this is tonight's dinner with the saffron risotto. It's step by step. It tells you all the ingredients. This means that anyone in the house can start making dinner because all the ingredients are there, right? So, so Jamie and I can, either one of us can start dinner, we can cook together, which is happening a lot more often these days, where we'll pull out the ingredients, we'll pull out the recipe cards, we'll just like, you take step one, I'll take step two. And we're cooking together. And there is like zero food waste. I wanted to show you from we get 3 meals a week, 3 dinners, 2 meals each. And so far this week, this is from 2 meals. This is our food waste, which is all compostable because we choose we're doing vegetarian option. Actually, we're doing pescatarian. I do order some fish every once in a while. You can add in some meat whenever you want. For the risotto tonight, if you wanted to put some pancetta in there as a little topping, you can do that. But this will go into our community compost. Or maybe I will aspire to be more like Reverend Adam and make my own vegetable stock for soups. Maybe we'll try. Although I think I put eggshells in there, which is probably a mistake. And so we're really enjoying it. I was going to just share with you that same statistic that upwards of 40% of food in the whole supply chain ends up being wasted with the way that Americans do their foods and their shopping and their delivery and all that sort of stuff. And that these pre-proportioned meals can cut down on that food waste by 2/3 at times. We only do 3 dinners a week with this. So I do, we cook other meals on other nights. I made a meal the other night that I made from scratch. And it was something I was kind of like, well, we have some ingredients, but we don't have these other things. And like, ooh, this has been in the fridge for a while, but I should use it up. It was gross. And we threw the whole thing out. So not only was it a failed dinner, but then it generated this tremendous amount of food waste because we didn't enjoy it. I don't think we've had a single meal through Blue Apron that we didn't enjoy. I'm going to add to the list of resources a study that was done by the University of Michigan that compared traditional grocery shopping with meal kit delivery and showed that the meal kit delivery actually had lower overall carbon footprint. Yes, the packaging is higher and people really tend to focus on that, but I think it's because the packaging is really visual, right? It's right in front of your face. You can see, here's the garbage that I have associated with, my little thing of cheese and my little spice blend. And it's visual, and I have to deal with that I am creating more of that physical, sort of plastic waste. But that when you look at the whole supply chain, sometimes things like meal delivery kits will cut out 1, 2, 3 steps in that supply chain. And those kinds of emissions really do add up. And so we focus on recycling, I focus on composting, and I try to remember when I'm making choices like this, that there's a lot that goes into the waste that we produce that we don't see, right? That it is buried somewhere in the supply chain. I think that's basically it, and I'm happy to answer any other questions about that or anything else. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Dan, if we can get the next slide. So like we said earlier, and when we began the program, that what we would love to do is for people to, having thought about some of these things, to think about what are some small steps that they can take to to change some of their food choices. So what we were hoping is that, because we're not there in person and we can't pass out the little slips, that if people, can look through this and then write in the chat or email, you certainly can email us with some of the things that you might want to commit to do. Like, I will compost my food waste. I will join a CSA. I will purchase more sustainably grown or raised food, whatever. But I think it's important for us to kind of be thinking about one small thing that we might want to do to make a change.
And if you will share those with us by chat or by email, we will transcribe them onto the stickers that Diane has produced, and we'll post them on the board, the food workshop board in the Portico, as we've done with the other workshops. And so, your commitments will be there for the congregation to see. I think that's important.
And so Diane is asking in the chat, who do you email? Dan, can she email Green Sanctuary at West Hartford UU?
Yeah, I think, is it Green? I gotta double check. It's either Green Sanctuary, or it might just be GS. I think it's GS.
Yeah, I think it's GS. Okay.